Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our Pixel Composer tutorial. And I want to have three objectives for creating these videos. I'll try and do a video series. We're going to first find out what is Pixel Composer, what it's used for, and we'll look at what a node is. In the other future lessons, we will actually look more into the software and create practical examples. Pixel Composer is a node-based visual effects and animation tool that's primarily made for pixel art. And you can actually think of Pixel Composer like the After Effects, right? Or Blender's node editor or Substance Designer node editor. In fact, Pixel Composer was made using Game Maker Studio and Substance Designer. So here I just clicked at the logo icon, and if you scroll down, it says it's made with Game Maker Studio 2 and Affinity Designer, right? So Affinity Designer is now I think Affinity, but they used Affinity Designer as one of the graphics, suites, and that's what they actually used to build this software. So again, so what does it actually do? Well, it lets you create pixel art visuals, visual effects. So things like pixel art smoke, fire, blood splashes, magic, and explosions. These are all things it will allow you to create, right? So also things like shader-like effects, particle effects, post-processing on pixel art. If you want to make your pixel art glow, you want to create like heat wave distortions, cathode ray to tube effects, change your color edits. Basically, it's used by indie game developers who make classic retro style games in game engines like Godot, in Unity, or Game Maker. So what is it specifically used for? So basically you use Pixel Composer to generate or enhance your pixel art effects without having to draw every frame manually. Now I have a sprite here. If I'm using a sprite, if I wanted to create some fire explosions or animation effects, I'll have to actually draw everything, manually, right? But with things like Pixel Composer, you don't really need to, do that. Let's say, example, I want to do animations, I want to create some of these exploding effects, I want to cut this apple into pieces. Then I'll have to start creating my animation frames, like a new frame. Then maybe I'll use the eraser tool and just chop up some of these edges like that. So let's say I have a new frame again, and then chop up this edge, and then I have an animation, and then play it like that. Well, Pixel Composer will allow you to do things like that and much more at a much more faster pace. All right. So also, like I mentioned, creating animations. So you can create animations for your explosions, fire and smoke, energy and magical orbs. We can add effects to already existing sprites. You can bring your sprites in and add those effects. Now, another thing Pixel Composer does is to create procedural textures and patterns. So you can create seamless, repeating, tileable textures, things like noise maps, metal textures, sci-fi screen, background effects, all of that. Another thing Pixel Composer does is to allow you to export to your game engine sprite sheets. You can have a GIF, you can have, PNG image sequences, you can have shader masks, and you can also have normal and height maps, which you can use for lighting. Another confusing thing about Pixel Composer is it works like it's actually node-based editor. So what is a node? Because you can't use Pixel Composer without talking about nodes. Now, in Pixel Composer and other node-based software like in Blender or Substance Designer, a node is like a small box that does one specific job. That's all it does. A node is a small box that does one specific job. You can connect a series of these nodes to create complicated nodes. So the basic node is just a small toolbox that does one specific job. In the background, it's a set of mathematical instructions, but we're not interested in that. We just want to pick a node and tell that node to do a specific job. Once that node does its one job, you can transfer the output of your node into the input of another node, which we'll actually see examples in this tutorial. So for examples of nodes, we have color nodes, and I'm just explaining this. I don't want to show anything yet because it might get overwhelming in this first lesson. We're just trying to learn what the tool can do. So for example, we can have a color node. We want to change the color of something. We can have a noise node to generate, random patterns. We can have a blur node to soften an image. We can have a blend node to combine two images. And we can have a transform node to rotate, scale, or move an image. And like I said, you can connect or chain nodes together, much like a child playing with Lego pieces, and the output of one node becomes the input of another node. So as a quick summary in this lesson, we haven't done anything with Pixel Composer. What we're doing in this tutorial is just to tell you what Pixel Composer is, what you can do with it in case you want to get it, and what you should expect, and how you can, what kind of output it can provide. That's all we're doing here. We're not opening any nodes. We're not creating complicated stuff. We're not connecting anything. We're not even looking at the UI. We'll have specific lessons for all that. But as a summary, Pixel Composer is a node-based tool for creating pixel art effects and animations. That's what it was made for. If you can do more than that, that's totally fine, but that's what it was made for. It is used for visual effects, particle effects, some lighting, sprite animation, working with textures, and applying post-processing effects to your pixel art. And a node, finally, is a small block, of a small block that performs one operation, and you combine or chain these nodes to create a full effect. So in our next lesson, we'll begin to look at the user interface of Pixel Composer. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next lesson.